You know that feeling. There's something you genuinely want to do. Maybe it's writing the book, or maybe it's starting the business you've imagined 100 times, or simply going for the run you promised yourself yesterday. You want it. You can already picture the version of yourself who's doing it, the one who finally begins, keeps going, and slowly builds a life that feels a little more like their own. Yet the moment you sit down to take that first step, your hand lingers over the keyboard. Your body suddenly feels heavier than it did a minute ago. Then, almost as if your mind has been waiting for permission, it starts offering alternatives. You should reply to those emails first. You should make some coffee. The kitchen could use a quick clean. Funny how none of those things felt urgent until now. And before you know it, you've spent 40 minutes reorganizing a drawer that didn't need organizing. You've watched 3 videos about productivity without actually being productive. You've scrolled through social media, checked the news, refreshed your email, anything except the one thing you actually set out to do. You tell yourself you'll start tomorrow, or after lunch, or once you've finished this one other thing that somehow feels more pressing in this exact moment. And then tomorrow comes, and the cycle repeats. Eventually, you begin to wonder, what's wrong with me? This question sits there in the quiet spaces, whispering that maybe you're just not cut out for this, that maybe you're lazy. But that's wrong, because this isn't laziness. Think about it. You've worked hard before. You've stayed up late to meet deadlines and even solved difficult problems. So why does the thing you actually care about feel like the hardest one to begin? Most of us answer that question the wrong way. We assume we're missing discipline, that we need a better planner, another productivity app, a stricter routine, and for a while, those things might even help. But eventually, the same pattern returns. You keep procrastinating. Neuroscientists have found that procrastination isn't simply a habit of poor planning. It's often the result of several brain systems doing exactly what they were designed to do, just in a situation they were never designed for. One brain system is the amygdala, your brain's emotional alarm system. Its job isn't to help you achieve your goals or make wise long-term decisions. Its job is much older than that. Its job is to detect whether something feels threatening, like uncertainty, possible failure, embarrassment, or even the pressure of wanting something too much, based on the emotional weight of the task or whatever else might trigger it. The amygdala triggers fear, anxiety, vigilance, and the stress response, that is, fight or flight mode. These stress and emotional signals interfere with the prefrontal cortex, the brain region where planning, reasoning, decision-making, and self-control largely happen. The prefrontal cortex is the part that writes schedules, sets goals, imagines the future, and reminds you why today's effort matters months from now. When the amygdala floods the system with stress signals, the prefrontal cortex becomes harder to access, making planning and self-control more difficult. At the same time, motivation to engage with the task is reduced because the brain no longer represents it as something attractive to pursue. Dopamine-related motivation is diminished relative to immediately rewarding alternatives, like scrolling your phone. So you end up choosing the easier activity because it provides immediate relief, reinforcing the avoidance. And there it is, the loop we're all caught in. You choose the phone, the relief hits, and your brain, ever the loyal student, files that sequence away as a successful survival strategy. Avoid the threat, feel better, repeat. But here's the part that doesn't show up in the brain scans. The part that sits with you long after the scrolling stops. The shame. The quiet erosion of self-trust that happens every time you walk away from something you love. You start to notice a pattern. You say you'll start tomorrow. Tomorrow comes. You don't. And somewhere in the background, a voice grows a little louder. See? You can't even do this one thing. What makes you think you can do anything that matters? That voice is dangerous. Not because it's critical, but because it's convincing. It takes your brain's misfiring threat response and turns it into a story about who you are. And once that story takes root, it begins writing the rest of your life for you. Here's what happens next. You stop trusting yourself, not consciously. You don't wake up one morning and declare, "I am unreliable." It's more subtle than that. The trust drains out slowly, like water from a leaky cup. You make a promise to yourself, and a part of you already knows you won't keep it. You set a goal, and another part of you is already preparing the excuse. That's the real damage of chronic procrastination. It's not the missed deadlines or the lost productivity. It's the quiet death of your own self-belief. And all of it starts with a perfectly normal brain trying to protect you from something that feels dangerous, even when the danger exists only in your imagination. Which raises an interesting question. If this is how your brain works, why doesn't it happen every single time? Why are there days when you wake up, sit down, and somehow everything clicks? The work flows. Starting doesn't feel impossible. You don't spend 40 minutes negotiating with yourself before writing the first sentence. The answer isn't that you suddenly became more disciplined overnight. It's that the emotional equation changed. Some days the task feels familiar enough that your brain no longer treats it as a threat. Some days you've slept well, your stress levels are lower, and your prefrontal cortex has more capacity to deal with uncertainty. Or sometimes you've done the task so many times that the amygdala simply stops sounding the alarm because what was once unfamiliar has become safe. Think about learning to drive. The first lesson is exhausting. Your heart races. Every decision feels important. You're painfully aware that you could make a mistake. A year later, you're driving home while thinking about what to cook for dinner. Why? It's not that the road suddenly became easier, it's because your brain simply stopped treating driving like a threat. That is why habituation matters. Habituation is the brain's natural tendency to reduce its response to a stimulus after repeated exposure. It's why you stop noticing the smell of your own home after being there for 10 minutes. It's why background noise fades into silence. And it's why, with enough exposure, the fear of starting that project can eventually dissolve. But here's the catch. Habituation requires exposure, and exposure requires starting, which is exactly what you've been avoiding. You see the paradox? The only way to make the task feel less threatening is to do it. But the threat response is what keeps you from doing it. You're stuck in a loop that can only be broken by stepping directly into the thing you're trying to escape. This is why waiting for motivation doesn't work. Motivation follows action, not the other way around. You don't wait for fear to disappear and then start. You start, and the fear begins to fade. That's the uncomfortable truth. So how do you actually break this cycle? Not with a productivity hack, not with a new app, with something far simpler and far harder. You have to retrain your brain's emotional association with the task. Right now, the task is paired with dread. Every time you think about it, your amygdala activates. The emotional association is strong because it's been reinforced every time you avoided the task. But you can create a new emotional association. One where the task becomes linked to relief, satisfaction, or even curiosity. And you do that by showing up in small, consistent doses, without demanding perfection, without expecting immediate results, and without attaching your entire self-worth to the outcome. So the next time you feel that resistance rising, that familiar pull toward distraction, try this. Pause. Don't fight the feeling and don't shame yourself for having it. Just pause and notice. I'm experiencing avoidance right now. My brain is trying to protect me from something it perceives as threatening. Then ask yourself one question. What's the smallest possible action I can take? One that feels almost laughably easy. Not write a chapter, not finish the business plan, and not run for 30 minutes. Consider something small, like opening the document or putting on running shoes. Then do it, without any pressure to continue, and without expectation that this tiny step will unlock a flood of productivity. Here's what happens when you do that. The amygdala's alarm begins to quiet down because action signals safety to the brain. Once you're moving, the threat response loses its grip. The prefrontal cortex, the part that plans and reasons, starts to re-engage. And dopamine, that elusive motivation chemical, begins to trickle back. Remember that you're not fixing everything in one moment. You're just building a new pathway. A pathway that says, this thing isn't dangerous. I can handle it in small pieces. And also remember to treat the task as an experiment, a curiosity, or even a chance to learn something. About the work, about yourself, or about what happens when you actually follow through. Doing so produces its own kind of relief, the relief of not carrying the weight anymore, the relief of knowing you showed up, the relief of keeping the promise you've been breaking for days, weeks, or even years. That relief is deeper and more lasting. It builds self-trust with every repetition. And slowly, almost without noticing, you stop seeing yourself as someone who never follows through. Then, one day, you sit down to work, and you realize you started without spending 20 minutes negotiating with yourself. Another day, you finish something that you would have abandoned a few months earlier. So the next time you catch yourself reaching for your phone instead of working on the thing you truly care about, simply make the task small enough to show your brain that it's safe. Do that often enough, and the task becomes familiar, and what once felt impossible becomes something you simply do.